Okay. Yeah, I'm grateful to present on behalf of Soumya as our first author here. We are going to talk about asphalt recycling, and more to particular, we are going to talk about the barriers and the governance dynamics that keep asphalt recycling currently in a niche. The idea of asphalt recycling is reducing impacts, but the general narrative that you might find out there is there's currently quality, performance uncertainties, there is fragmented governance and misaligned ambitions. So we wanted to investigate that around the barriers and the governance architecture behind it. We looked at relevant barriers that we identified through literature, reflected and verified those in the stakeholder context. So we conducted interviews with different stakeholder groups, and then we looked at the governance dynamics in 3 case studies. As I just mentioned, we identified the relevant barriers that are namely technical barriers, cultural barriers, regulatory and market barriers. And we are using the multi-level governance framework, so in short MLG framework, to understand the governance dynamics behind it. So for everyone who doesn't know, it's quite simply explained as type 1, which is basically hierarchical top-down, so with a clear authority, or type 2, which is basically a horizontal governance approach, so much more task-specific, collaborative, and responsibilities overlap. There's 4 characteristics that we're going to get into in a minute. So again, these broad categories were used out of literature in order to conduct interviews in the first wave. So here we identified the relevant stakeholder groups, namely government bodies, contractors, producers, consultants, and research institutes. In the second wave, then we talked to the responsible case studies that we identified to look at the governance dynamics specifically. The 4 barriers that we identified were used as basically the overarching structure to sort all the results from the interviews. This was done based on a coding analysis. And the results that you kind of see here as kind of headline results would be interesting to explore further in the paper in case you're interested. But I'm just going to name the main outcomes that were mostly listed by the different interviewees. So we have, for the technical category, we have mostly quality issues around area P as a concern, and particularly long-term performance issues. Kind of a vicious cycle in the sense of there is no long-term performance data, therefore less projects actually want to use it, so there is no long-term performance data. Logistics, mostly storage infrastructure issues, milling and processing, about the depth or the amount of layers that you take out of the road, and related environmental concerns. So cultural is really more on the behavioral, organizational side. There is a limited local capacity, meaning lack of experts, lack of information, in general, lack of information sharing across different stakeholder groups, and also a lack of collaboration is flagged in the interviews. Then we have regulatory, misaligned goals, meaning national levels and municipal levels not being aligned, fragmented and restrictive regulations, so no clear guidance from a national level, for example. Ownership constraints, meaning a municipality might own a road, but as soon as the materials go out of the road, that ownership control is lost, and therefore also the control over the materials. Tar content, making recycling impossible due to hazardous conditions of the asphalt. For the market, cost-driven procurement is seen as a barrier. Alongside actually the lack of environmental incentives in the Netherlands, you have environmental cost indicators that theoretically should support something like recycled asphalt, but it's just not widely applied. And market concentrations means there's just a few stakeholders controlling most of the supply. So basically, the information I just gave you emerged from all of these interviews. You can see here the frequency analysis of the 16 interviews in total and basically how often these themes appeared. Most interestingly, the lack of information sharing as a cultural barrier and also the limited local capacity are most important. And then there is a lot of technical barriers that are named most frequently. We can see kind of the narratives driven by the different stakeholder groups that we interviewed. We can see for asphalt producers, contractors, and engineering firms, in line with their general roles, dominate the debates around technical barriers. For the government, those are the regulatory barriers. And the research knowledge institutes are mostly concerned with the cultural barriers. We looked now at the governance dynamics behind these barriers. So we found these barriers, and the question as well, how do these barriers connect to the overall governance dynamics? And we have one municipal project, a pilot project. We have two national projects, Project B, a large maintenance project, and a highway expansion. And these projects were basically consultant, national authorities, and the local contractors were involved. Here we look again at the MLG framework I mentioned earlier with the four main characteristics, namely authority in decision-making, jurisdictional boundaries, coordination and communication mechanisms, and adaptability of governance mechanisms. And as a reminder, there is top-down, so this is type 1. And then there is the more horizontal integration of governance, which is type 2. We're going to look at the projects and the general sector. Generally, the authority in the market is type 1, so very centralized at the client level. In the case of the municipal project, it is much less like that. It's collaborative decision-making, so close to type 2 governance, while for project B and C, we have that centralization, so type 1 governance structures. We have jurisdictional boundaries, which is simply type 1, generally speaking, also very clear for each project, as municipal levels and national levels do not cooperate on any projects. There's no shared projects between them. For coordination and communication mechanisms, this is mostly type 1 for the general sector, while in these municipal pilot projects, you have a multi-directional communication approach, which is usually not mirrored in the national projects. And for adaptability, we have kind of a similar picture. So generally quite rigid structures, while the municipal level adopts more flexible governance structures that we cannot see on the national level that remains in this rigid structure. So this generally brings us to the thought that the barriers are not just independent from each other, but they are kind of reinforced by the governance dynamics. And the general idea is that the type 1 dominance in the sector actually facilitates some of this lock-in that the general sector is experiencing. So there is stability given by the type 1 structure, the top-down structure, but at the same time, it's a constraint for innovation and actually feedback loops. So innovation that might be happening in a pilot project actually doesn't arrive in national standards. And the general idea means that the current governance structures are not sufficient to help asphalt recycling to break out of its current state to become more mainstream. And neither type 1 nor type 2 represent the perfect solution. So what this paper is trying to say is there is a strong dominance of this top-down approach that might hinder the overcoming of some of the identified barriers, and this MLG thinking might provide an interesting lens in order to resolve some of them. So the stability given on an authority or jurisdictional level, that makes a lot of sense, sticking to type 1, but in terms of communication and adaptability, it doesn't. So we could imagine, for example, on the national level, standards being connected through provincial communication between projects or regions to facilitate more of a type 2 architecture. But that is for future research. So the conclusion would be that barriers are likely supported or reinforced by governance dynamics, and type 2 and type 1 governance provides an interesting lens to analyze how this lock-in is happening. And if we can change those, that might indicate that ARP can become more mainstream.
Thank you. Questions?
Just a clarification. You said there are barriers, but